Hello everyone, my name is Julie Cunningham. I'm a meteorologist with the National Weather Service Weather Forecast Office here in Salt Lake City, and I'm here today to discuss the fairly unusual water year that we've seen thus far, as well as all things water and snowpack related to the state of Utah. Although we've experienced a fairly normal amount of precipitation this season, our snowpack has been highly elevation dependent given such warm temperatures and high snow levels throughout the winter. So at high elevations, we're seeing fairly near normal SWE or snow water equivalent, which strongly contrasts with snowpack that is really near or even below record minimums in the low to mid elevations. Luckily, our soil moisture does remain above normal statewide, hopefully leading to a more efficient runoff of this snowpack come springtime. So we'll start off with kind of a high-level overview of what we've seen so far this water year since October 1st, with a couple of these charts from the Western Regional Climate Center. On the left here, we have percent of normal precipitation, and then on the right, we have mean temperature departure from normal. So on the left here, you can see it's kind of a mixed bag across the Western U.S., but across the Western U.S., we've seen a lot of talk about what a poor winter this has been, with very long dry spells as well as a lack of valley snow. So you might be surprised to see on this map that much of Utah is actually near normal precipitation. As you can see here, the green shading represents above normal precipitation, whereas the brown shading is below normal precip. So as you can see, central Utah is kind of in that brown color, so has been seeing below normal precip as a whole, whereas southern Utah has been doing a little bit better. They're actually a smidge above normal. So our snowpack is struggling not because of this precipitation that we've had, but it's really from the warm temperatures and high snow levels that we've had. As you can see on the right-hand side, a whole bunch of Utah is in that kind of darker red, orange color shading, which represents temperatures around 5 to 10 degrees above normal as a whole since October 1st. So with all these warmer storms that we've been seeing, we've had snow levels up to 9,000 or even higher, 9,000 feet or even higher. So a lot of that rainfall has been falling in the mid to low elevations, with snow really only at the highest elevations in Utah, as a whole. So, these two charts in tandem, this kind of shows that focusing on snowpack, while extremely important, isn't quite telling the whole story. So that's kind of why we're here today, to provide you with a little bit more context surrounding Utah's snowpack and water supply. So this plot from the NRCS shows a timeline of precipitation, just generalized for the entire state of Utah. So as you can see, that black line there represents 2026 or water year 2026. So we can see that in general, we've been kind of close to that median line, that lime green line in the center there. We've been more or less close to that median for pretty much the whole winter. We did have a very wet start to October. As you can see, we reached way above median to start the water year, but it kind of slowed as we headed into later October and November, and then became a little bit more active, as shown by that middle pink circle, as we headed into more late November and into December. However, at that point, we were doing okay by that point, but we had this really long dry spell that lasted probably around 4 weeks or so through much of January and into February, which really made us go below median for our precip statewide. Now, luckily, this most recent storm cycle from last week, we were able to get back up closer to median, which is kind of what we saw in that last chart as well, with near median precipitation, just generalized statewide. But as a whole, and this is kind of a recurring theme that we'll talk about through this video, but this really long dry spell that was really detrimental to our snowpack. And, as a whole, we went from around the 60th percentile before the dry spell, at least precipitation-wise, down to maybe around the 40th percentile, where those that green and yellow shading kind of intersect. So that was a really, really not great for our snowpack as a whole as well. If we look at this a bit more spatially as we go through the months from these maps from the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, we can see This shows monthly precipitation. So to start, we have October, where the cooler colors, those blues and purples, represent above normal precipitation, whereas the warmer colors represent below normal precipitation. So of course, we started out with a pretty wet October, especially in the first half of the month, especially across northern Utah. You can even see some of the purple shading there, which is representative of 200 to 300% of average precipitation for each basin. Of course, we slowed down a little bit heading into November. The southern Utah area still did actually fairly well. We had a couple southern stream systems that moved through the area, whereas northern Utah really started to struggle a bit at this point. Heading into December, kind of hit or miss across the state, just depending on where you look. But again, as a whole, we saw in that plume plot that we were kind of modestly active throughout much of the month until we hit that dry spell. Next, heading into January, on that left-hand side, we can see that a lot of red, orange colors, which are indicative of well below normal precipitation, of course, with that long dry spell that we had starting in kind of early January. We do see a couple basins there with green shading, but that's probably just from that early January system that moved through before we hit that dry spell. And then finally in February, in that middle image there, again, kind of a mixed bag, depending on what basin you look at. We did see more active weather start to pick up, especially in the middle of the month, and especially last week with that good storm cycle that we had. So as a whole, on the right side, that shows water year-to-date precipitation. So since October 1st, it looks pretty similar to the graphic that we already saw at the start of this talk, where southern Utah was maybe seeing a bit better, whereas central Utah was maybe struggling just a little bit more. But as a whole, we're kind of roughly near normal precipitation, really across the whole state. So we've talked a lot so far about precipitation and how we've been near normal, but of course our snowpack isn't really quite the same story if we're looking at it from a 30,000 foot view statewide. So here's another similar plot from the NRCS that shows snow water equivalent or snowpack statewide, just generalized across all elevations, all locations. So even from the start of the season, we've been really struggling. We've been hovering maybe around the 10th percentile, kind of flirting with record low minimums pretty much across, much of that whole water year so far, focusing especially on, October, November, December. We even briefly touched that record low value in late December, despite a somewhat active storm cycle at that point. And then, of course, we did a little bit better to start the new year, but unfortunately, that we had that that long dry spell in January and much of February as well. That really put us in a bad place. We see record low snowpack during that period. I believe that is early February, where we are below the minimum from the period of record of all these snowtel sites. So, even before this dry spell that we had, we already weren't really in a great place to start. And then this dry spell just puts us in an even worse place snowpack-wise as we head into March. Even though we did see, an active storm cycle last week, which, got us above minimums, but we're still not really in a good place as we head into March. And our winter season is quickly declining as we head into March, and then especially by April, snowpack tends to decrease after that point. Another way to look at this is a view of snow water equivalent by basin. Again, this is another image from the NRCS that shows percentages of normal by basin, which is the large shapes that you see. Again, a lot of red, orange, yellow shading indicative of below normal snow water equivalent. And then we can also see different snowtail sites that are plotted on there by the circles. Again, see a lot of red, orange, yellow there too. However, we do actually see a handful of green sites, which show actually near normal snow water equivalent. As I alluded to earlier, these sites are mostly high elevation sites, generally above 9,000 feet or so. So again, this really just highlights that our snowpack this year is really elevation dependent thanks to these warm temperatures that we've been seeing. Here is another similar graphic to a couple slides ago, but this shows a statistical projection of where we could be moving forward. So this isn't based off of any weather forecasts or meteorological information. This is just based off of the period of record and what has happened in prior years when we're at this point. Each of the dashed lines represents a different percentile, with that dark blue line showing the max possible place where we could reach, whereas that dark red shows, the lowest that we can reach. And each of these have a very small chance of occurring. The dashed lines in between show the 10th, 30th, 50th, and 70th and 90th percentiles for these projections. So we can see that our median, shown by the dashed green line, really only reaches into the yellow climatological percentiles, also known as, way below what we're seeing for median, which is that solid green line there. We can also see relative to the green line that, again, based on past years, only that 10th, not the 10th, the 90th percentile projection reaches that median line. So, from this, we can decipher that there's roughly a 10% chance that we reach that median SWE. And again, we could have been in a different or a better place if we hadn't had that dry spell in January and February. But this is kind of just the cards that were dealt, and that's where we are at this point. Another way to look at some of this data is to compare it to last year. So here's a look at snow water equivalent for this year compared to last year at this time. So last year, we saw a really active northern stream and ended up, I believe, near normal snowpack for last year, whereas the southern mountains really struggled last year. So going back to this year, last year, and then back to this year, we can see the main difference here is just the lack of mid to low elevation snowpack. This is especially apparent if you look at areas like, say, the Wasatch Back. You can see there's a lot of gray shading in the Wasatch Back there, which shows around trace to up to 1 inch of water equivalent, compared to last year where it was more around 2 to 6 inches of SWE. Moving further south, we can see the Central Mountains this year are in not as great of a place compared to last year. Finally, one bit of silver lining, I suppose, is, so this is last year, the Southern Mountains, of course, the SWE was pretty low at this time last year, but this year they're actually doing a bit better, even in the mid to low elevations, or at least the mid elevations, I'll say. Pivoting a bit to our reservoir conditions, this graph on the left shows a timeline of the last year and where our reservoir capacities are. So the blue line shows the previous year. So if you look at the right-hand side, that's where we were this time last year. The current year is the green line. So again, the right-hand side, that's where we are currently this year. And then that orange line shows the median of where we typically are. So looking at the green line, again, that's the current year. We still are around 5% above our median capacity. However, we still are quite a bit lower than we are last year, but thankfully still in a good place, at least with regards to our reservoirs. Another silver lining here is our soil moisture. This graph on the left here from the NRCS shows soil moisture at a depth of 20 inches. And of course, the green to blue colors show above normal soil moisture. Some of these basins are reaching 200% or more of median soil moisture for this time of year. But however, we did not start out the year quite in such a good place. I mean, you can see by that left pink arrow, we were below median soil moisture, but it was really those heavy October rains that really spiked us up really pretty quickly to well above median by the time we hit November. Additionally, with rain falling at mid to low elevations, that does help our soil moisture. So you can see a couple of more spikes in the late November and then late December timeframes where we had a lot of that mid to low elevation rainfall, which helped our soil moistures as a whole and really kept us up almost near our maximum values at the start of the calendar year. Now, with that dry spell, things did dry out a bit and our soil moistures responded appropriately, but we're luckily still sitting at above median values around at least the 60th percentile. As far as drought conditions go, we are still in drought across pretty much the entire state of Utah, ranging from D0 or abnormally dry conditions all the way to D3 or extreme droughts. With no D4 as of right now. Moving forward with our seasonal drought outlook, you can see this dark brown color suggests that the drought will persist across pretty much the entire state of Utah, so not much change expected. Weather-wise, moving forward, here's a look at our 1-month Climate Prediction Center outlook that suggests that Utah will lean towards odds of above normal temperatures, as well as below normal precipitation, at least for the southern 2/3 of the state. Now, across that northern third, luckily, there are equal chances of above normal or below normal precipitation, at least for the month of March. Moving forward to the seasonal outlook for March, April, and May, it's kind of more of the same with odds favoring above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation, pretty much statewide, but particularly across southern Utah. So in summary, it's been a really unusual water year thus far with no really recent analogs. It's been so warm. We've seen normal high elevation snowpack, but really limited low to mid elevation snowpack. And that's really just because of, again, the temperatures. We've received a normal amount of precip this season, but it's really just those temperatures and high snow levels that has created this very large contrast from the low to mid elevations to elevations above, say, 9,000 feet or so. And finally, luckily, soil moisture does remain above normal statewide, which could potentially lead to more efficient runoff of our snowpack come the springtime to hopefully boost our reservoirs even more so above median than where we are right now. With that, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Hayden Mahan, Glenn Merrill, or myself at nws.saltlakecity@noaa.gov. Thanks again.